Why are you sitting down? It's common sense for a wife to stand. I was 7 months pregnant. At a family gathering, my stomach started hurting, so I sat down, only for my husband to kick my stomach. Hey Thomas, what the hell do you think you're doing? Shut up! Besides, it's probably just a girl in there. Brian also changed his tone and called out to Thomas. But Thomas retorted without any regard for me and arrogantly dismissed it. I watched Thomas as he walked away. Unaware of my gaze, Thomas sat down with a mean smirk. However, my gaze shifted to a person who stood up in front of Thomas. This person walked up to the seated Thomas and then took a certain action against him. My name is Elizabeth. I'm 30 years old. I moved from the countryside to New York for college and then found a job. I married Thomas 2 years ago, and we're now expecting our first child. I met Thomas at work, where he was the son of the president of a client company. Thomas has an older brother, Brian, who works as a senior executive in the company and is a so-called elite with a degree from a foreign university. There are rumors that Brian might become the president. Although Thomas isn't the heir, he seems to intend to work in the company as a senior executive for a long time. At first, I wondered why someone like him would take an interest in me. But Thomas's persistent courtship didn't stop, and I eventually started dating him. Thomas was very kind, and his company was stable with a long history. I became more attracted to Thomas and decided to get married. I quit my job when we got married, influenced by a comment from my mother-in-law, Karen. It's only natural for a woman to focus on her family after getting married. And at least until the child is 3 years old, the mother should raise them. When I announced my pregnancy, Karen first told me this. Apparently, she didn't like that Brian's wife, Linda, didn't quit her job even after getting pregnant and giving birth. It's pitiful to send children to preschool. Working while leaving your child in preschool makes our company look bad. Karen would badmouth and complain about Linda every time we went to visit. Thomas, hearing this, wouldn't stop Karen's complaint. Brian's just too lenient with Linda, but would instead agree with her. I don't have any entrepreneurs in my circle. So maybe there's something I don't understand between the eldest son's wife and the mother-in-law. That's why I couldn't say anything about their conversations. However, perhaps interpreting my silence as agreement, both Thomas and Karen thought I shared their views, and their bad-mouthing of Linda only escalated. After all, it's not like the company would be in trouble without Linda working. Maybe Linda is saving up money for when she divorces Brian. Nothing good comes when a woman has money. There were times when I thought it was too much, but I was too ashamed to argue back. I had heard that Linda wanted to work because she felt the company couldn't function without her. But Karen seemed to dislike that statement itself. Elizabeth quit right away, so we don't have to worry about that. Unlike Linda, I wasn't against quitting my job. So, I didn't resist much when I was told to quit. However, I definitely felt uncomfortable with Karen and Thomas, who never asked about my feelings. Because of this, I became a housewife right after getting married. But then, Thomas started to make comments that seemed to look down on me. You're not working, so at least do the housework properly. He would complain like this when he came home. Of course, I did what I could, like cleaning, laundry, and preparing meals. But as a newbie housewife, I didn't know what more I could do, and I started to feel uneasy whenever Thomas was around. When I went to my parents' house, Thomas would even complain to Karen that I, a housewife, couldn't even do household chores properly. Believing him, Karen also started to complain to me. Elizabeth, it's troublesome if you don't properly support Thomas. The wives of my sons are all so useless. Karen started to scold me too, and I felt smaller every time I visited my husband's family. Yet, At least it's better than Brian's place. Those two don't even bother to visit our home. Well, that's true. But hearing that made it impossible for me to distance myself from my husband's family. I feared the backlash I might face if I ever distanced myself from them, especially after seeing Thomas's proud expression every time those words were said. Gradually, I began to think that I was better off than Linda, the eldest son's wife, despite how harshly Thomas treated me or how much Karen scolded me. Thinking I was better than Linda somehow helped me get through it. Time passed since our marriage, and I found out I was pregnant. Both Thomas's parents and Thomas himself were very happy about it. One day, I went shopping alone. It was for dinner groceries. However, I started feeling sick on the way and couldn't make it to the supermarket, ending up sitting on the side of the road. "Are you okay?" Someone approached me at that moment. "Oh, isn't this Elizabeth? What happened?" It was Linda, coincidentally. She had just finished her part-time job and was on her way to pick up her daughter from preschool. Among those who passed by me without a word, Linda stopped her car to check on me. Having heard so much about Linda from Karen and Thomas, I didn't trust her and brushed her off. "I'm fine." I pushed her away, but Linda stubbornly said, "I'll drive you home, so get in the car." I hadn't finished shopping, but I wasn't in a condition to shop. Hesitantly, I got into her car, and Linda bought me tea and drove me home. It felt like it had been a long time since someone had been so kind to me. I was moved to tears. Maybe it was because the morning sickness had made me emotionally fragile. Linda listened to my story the entire way and comforted me. Later, remembering my complaint about not being able to eat anything due to morning sickness, she brought me jelly and ice cream. "These are what I eat, so I don't know if you can eat them, Elizabeth." I was very grateful when she handed them to me. However, that night, when Thomas opened the refrigerator, he frowned at its contents in confusion. "What's with this jelly? And all this ice cream? It's a waste of money, especially when you're not working," I retorted. "No, that's not it. Linda brought them over because I was having a hard time with morning sickness and couldn't manage." "Linda did?" I nodded in response. I explained how Linda had coincidentally helped me when I felt ill on the street and couldn't move, and how she had later brought me some snacks. Hearing this, Thomas frowned. "I see, we've caused her trouble." Or, "That was kind of her." That's why I told him the story, but Thomas's reaction was far from what I had imagined. "What are you doing? Don't make us owe that couple anything." After I finished my story, Thomas said that, holding his head in his hands. "Huh? Why? She helped us. There's no need to talk like that." I couldn't help but voice my opinion. Then, Thomas glared at me with sharp eyes and slowly took out a trash bag. "Just throw this away," and began to throw away the snacks one by one. I could only watch in shock. "Never rely on the money from someone who disregards mom's advice and works on her own." Thomas said that. In Thomas's view, Karen's words were absolute. I couldn't find the words to respond. After that, Linda contacted me a few times, concerned about my health, but I always told her I was fine to avoid any trouble with Thomas. There were days when I felt so ill I wanted to ask someone for help. No matter how bad my morning sickness was, if I cut corners with the housework, Thomas would complain. Yet, the one thing I couldn't do was ask Linda for help. Somehow, my morning sickness settled down, and I reached 7 months of pregnancy. At the recent checkup, the baby's growth was on track, and we found out the gender, so we slowly started preparing for the arrival. "It looks like the baby is going to be a girl," I reported to Thomas right away. But he seemed not very interested. Maybe men have a harder time feeling the reality of becoming a parent, and Thomas is probably no exception. I didn't say anything more about it. Then we welcomed the new year. Every new year, relatives gather at my husband's family home. Even my brother-in-law's family, who usually don't visit, come with their whole family for the new year. I'm home. Happy New Year! We visited my husband's family home together on January 2nd. Happy New Year! Elizabeth, how are you feeling? It seemed the brother-in-law's family had arrived earlier, and Linda immediately spoke to me. She's fine. Don't worry about it. Even though she was addressing me, Thomas responded with a forced smile to Linda and went inside without properly greeting her. Elizabeth, I've been waiting for you. It's been lonely without someone to talk to. Karen welcomed me as usual. Despite Linda being there, Karen said she was lonely, which made me greet her with a wry smile. However, the incident happened that night. To prepare for dinner, Karen, Linda, and I were in the kitchen. Apart from us, there were about 15 relatives, including my father-in-law's siblings, gathered at my husband's family home. Thomas, who had already started toasting with the relatives, was speaking the loudest. Work is going smoothly, and Elizabeth listens well to me and Mom, so my life is going great with a good wife. That wasn't a compliment to me. It was clear to everyone that it was a dig at Brian and Linda. Elizabeth, could you bring the beer? Yes. Karen seemed to find me more convenient to use than Linda, always asking me for help. I was bustling around with my big belly. But, inevitably, I started to feel some discomfort from moving too much. Linda was the first to notice. Elizabeth, you've been rubbing your stomach. Are you in pain? Oh, really? You should have said something. You need to rest for a bit. Karen quickly responded to Linda's observation. Though her tone was a bit sharp, she told me to take a break. Thinking I'd be in the way in the kitchen, I sat in a chair in the room next to the living room, rubbing my belly and watching what was happening around me. In front of me, Brian was feeding his and Linda's son, Anthony. Are you okay, Elizabeth? If you can't do something, you should tell Mom. Your health is important. Thank you. Brian said that to me. And we chatted for a bit. We talked about when Anthony was born and what he likes now. Hearing stories from Brian, a father, was very insightful, and it was clear he was very involved in parenting. Do you know the gender of your baby? Yes, it seems to be a girl. That'll be cute. However, Thomas, who overheard this, seemed displeased and stood up with a sour expression. I thought he might be heading to the bathroom, but instead, he came straight over to me. Why are you sitting down? What? I was taken aback by his sudden question. As I asked Thomas for clarification, he shockingly kicked my stomach. It wasn't with much force, but I involuntarily cried out and doubled over in the chair, clutching my belly. The shock of being treated that way left me unable to move, more than the pain itself. Dramatic much. It's common sense for a wife to stand. Why are you sitting here chatting while making Mom work? Hey, Thomas. What do you think you're doing? What's the big deal? It's just a girl in there anyway. Eventually, she'll get married and leave, and she won't be any use to the company, so it's fine. Brian's tone changed as he addressed Thomas. However, Thomas retorted without any consideration for me and arrogantly dismissed it. Hey, that's too much. Although I couldn't see who it was, I heard a relative calling Thomas out. I've decided not to be a pathetic husband who spoils his wife like someone else. If my wife is being negligent, it's up to me to correct her. Laughing, Thomas said this and then walked away from me. The problem is that Brian can't control Linda. He lets her do whatever she wants. Do you think someone like that can control the company in the future? Dad should think about it. I think I'm more suited to be the president. I'm sure Mom thinks the same. Hearing this, I felt like I finally understood what Thomas was thinking. Thomas's behavior of affirming everything Karen said and acting under her influence was probably to gain her support. The same goes for saying bad things about Brian and others. It seems that Karen was upset about losing the position of president to her eldest son, Brian, so she decided to have Karen tell her father-in-law to make her president. That's why he had been forcing me to act in a way that would make Karen like me. I glared at Thomas, who was laughing and sitting in his own seat, unaware of my gaze. However, my attention then shifted to my father-in-law, Richard, who stood up in front of Thomas. Richard, confirming that Thomas had sat down, silently stood up and approached Thomas. "What?" And then, Richard kicked Thomas hard. Everyone was left speechless by this. Even Thomas was stunned and unable to speak, staggering from the impact. "You don't have a child inside you, so it should be fine. And if a child is wrong, it's up to the father to correct them." Richard said this and tried to grab Thomas by the collar. "Dad, calm down." The one who stopped him was Brian, who had been ridiculed by Thomas all this time. "Brian, aren't you upset about being talked down to all this time?" Richard said this. But Brian just laughed. "Not at all. I actually felt sorry for him." "What?" "Because it's true, right? Obsessing over the title of president to the point where you can't even cherish your family. If you're that desperate to be president, then go ahead, let Thomas do it." Thomas turned beet red at those words. The company and the title of president that he wanted so much. Maybe he felt like he had lost to Brian, who had said something that made him give it away so easily, and maybe he was also embarrassed by being called pitiful. Plus, I believe families should work together and respect each other, not control each other. The same goes for our employees. I want to create a company where employees cooperate and respect each other. Since I'm not good at controlling people, Thomas, who can control things better, should do it. Besides, my family is more important to me. It was clear who was more suited to be president. Despite Brian provocatively offering the presidency to Thomas twice, Thomas, being the person in question, couldn't find the words to respond and just turned redder. He only opened and closed his mouth without saying anything coherent. "All right, that's enough." Linda was the one who changed the tense atmosphere. "Thank you, Richard, for standing up for Brian." Richard showed a slightly embarrassed expression at her words. And Thomas looked down, even more frustrated. "Thomas, did you think Brian couldn't control me because I sent Anthony to preschool before he was 3, just like Karen said? Because that's the reality, right? We're a president's family, and we have to consider how it looks from the outside. Brian really thought about it. He wouldn't let you work, Linda." Thomas only seemed confident when he could argue back. I was utterly astounded by such a Thomas. Indeed, that's true. But it's not like Brian didn't think about it. He asked me to quit too. But I wanted to work, so I asked him. If you're going to blame someone, blame me alone. Compared to them, Brian and Linda seemed wonderful to me. Their relationship, where they care for and respect each other's desires, was admirable. It made me feel foolish for ever worrying about what Karen said. "Until the child is 3? What's that about? Was Karen saying such arbitrary things?" Richard seemed unaware of Karen's statements and sighed in exasperation, apologizing. "I'm sorry, Linda and Elizabeth, for any distress caused by Karen's words." "Please, there's no need to apologize. And hearing Thomas's words earlier, I'm truly sorry, Elizabeth, for how Thomas's foolishness must have made you feel uncomfortable. Richard sincerely apologized to us without concern for others' opinions. Instead of needing an apology, I felt guilty that Richard was apologizing to us when he was actually protecting us. Karen, who had come into the living room at some point, was flustered by Richard's demeanor. I just meant... She tried to make excuses with an uncomfortable expression. While I believe her comment about children staying home until age 3 wasn't intended to be malicious, the fact remains that her complaints and harsh words hurt Linda and pressured me. Karen, don't make excuses. Isn't it embarrassing to interfere in parenting? Richard reprimanded Karen, who seemed to finally realize the foolishness and irresponsibility of her words. Linda, we're truly grateful to your family's company. Of course, you're welcome to continue working. We understand that the company can't function without you, so please continue to support us in both business and personal matters. Richard then addressed Linda, which confused everyone. Thomas, Karen, myself, and even the other relatives were puzzled by his words. Dad, remember we agreed not to talk about Linda's family business? Brian said with a laugh, followed by a troubled smile from Linda. What does that mean? I asked Linda, as I'm sure everyone was wondering the same. Linda opened her mouth to meet his expectations. My dad's the president of the company. My marriage to Brian and the company have nothing to do with each other, but it seems Brian only told Richard about it. The room went silent at Linda's words. The company she mentioned was well known in the area, much larger than Richard's and also a business partner. Linda's father, the president, was busy and disliked public appearances, so no one knew his face. Karen and Thomas had met him as Linda's father but had no idea he was the president. Linda worked as an executive director in her family's company. The revelation shocked Thomas and Karen, who had been disparaging Linda's work. The two of them have been making fun of Linda, who works there. They probably never expected her to be the daughter of the president of a company that their company is indebted to. They were at a loss for words, unable to even formulate an apology. However, it's clear after today's events that I cannot entrust the company to Thomas. Thomas finally received a definitive statement from his father-in-law. I understand you care about the company and its dealings, but a company is its employees. Someone who can't cherish their family can't possibly cherish their employees. Thomas, pale-faced, pleaded for forgiveness with a deep apology. You're right, Dad. I was wrong. Please give me another chance. Despite Thomas's desperation, Richard raised his voice again. You're apologizing to the wrong person. At those words, Thomas, shaking, stood up and staggered towards me. I instinctively covered my belly, fearing he might do something again. Seeing this, Thomas seemed hurt and began to cry, kneeling down. Elizabeth, I'm sorry. The baby must have been hurt too. I'm so sorry. Thomas broke down in tears, appearing to truly regret his actions. Behind him, Karen also muttered, Linda, I'm sorry. I said terrible things to you. Linda, hearing this, smiled and dismissed it. You should be apologizing to Elizabeth. She's been under a lot of pressure listening to my complaints. And the baby in her belly must have heard all of Grandma's words too. Karen, taken aback by Linda's words, apologized to me. Elizabeth, I'm sorry. Both seemed genuinely remorseful, and Linda and I shared a smile. However, Richard was not satisfied with their apologies. Karen and Thomas, get out. I don't want to see your faces today. He then had Karen and Thomas leave the room. After they left awkwardly, a relative spoke up. "Come on, Elizabeth and Linda, let's eat together." "Yes, let's eat." "Yes." And so, surrounded by everyone, Linda and I enjoyed a pleasant meal. For the first time visiting my husband's family home, I spent an enjoyable evening. Richard's anger didn't subside for a while, and Thomas was eventually banned from the house. His dream of becoming the president vanished, and though he remained at the company, there was no sign of advancement from his position as a regular employee. Perhaps because of this, Thomas no longer talked incessantly about the company. When I, unable to forgive him for kicking my stomach, suggested divorce, he offered a deep apology and promised never to drink alcohol again. I proposed a separation, but Thomas, with nowhere else to go, ended up staying at the company, managing with delivery meals and showering at a gym. This lifestyle seemed to take its toll, as Thomas lost a considerable amount of weight within a month. However, he continued to work daily and kept in touch with me. "Do you need anything? How's your health?" Gradually, I began to open up to Thomas again. Feeling pity for him, I told him he could return home, and upon his return, Thomas apologized once more. He seemed like a changed person, not only refraining from complaining about housework, but also taking the initiative to do it. "You rest, Elizabeth." Now, with my growing belly, he even takes care of the more strenuous cleaning tasks for me. Richard, seeing this change, has allowed Thomas to visit the family home again when he has time. Karen has also become much quieter, no longer speaking ill of Linda. "I want to work hard for my family now, rather than just for the company." Thomas now often expresses such sentiments. Although I can never fully forgive him for kicking my stomach, I believe people can change. With the current Thomas, I feel confident we can happily welcome our baby.
Emily, I want a divorce. While I was doing the dishes, my husband John blurted that out unexpectedly. What? Why? I was taken aback by the suddenness. You see, I'm about to come into $3 million. That's a hell lot of money, right? But it's mine. I don't intend to share it with you. What does that have to do with a divorce? The truth is, I stayed with you for the money, Emily. Your salary isn't much, but it's better than nothing. So I reluctantly carried on with our married life. But once I get those $3 million, I won't need you anymore. I want to live a relaxed life alone. So please, let's part ways. Fine. If you have that much money, you can sell the house. It will cover the mortgage too. John was a bit surprised that I agreed without any resistance. This would mean goodbye to my tiresome life up to now. I slammed some papers onto the table in the living room. My name is Emily. I love children and work as a preschool teacher. I met John, who is 2 years older than me, through a friend's introduction, and we've been married for almost 8 years now. We bought a house thinking about having children, looking forward to happy days ahead. That's what I thought during our newlywed days. But soon after we got married, John's attitude completely changed. He became more and more obsessed with money. Before we got married, he would tell me my job was a wonderful job, but then he started saying, "Emily, all you have to do is play with kids. I'm working my ass off here. You've got a good gig. I bet they call people like you a freeloader." Those words soon became his catchphrase. Being a daycare teacher is tough too. Each child has a different personality, and above all, we are entrusted with their lives. There's no such thing as an easy job. But he didn't listen and ignored my complaints. I was so frustrated and upset. The reason we don't have children, even though we've been married for 8 years, is also due to this. He would say, "If you have time to make babies, you should work more." Don't tell me you're planning to quit your job using a baby as an excuse. We have a mortgage and taxes to pay, you know? What are you thinking? Don't ever talk about having kids again. I was yelled at and couldn't say anything back. Sure, John is older and has a career, so his income is higher than mine. But the gap isn't that big. It's only a difference of a few $1,000s, and yet he acts high and mighty every time. I take pride in my job and feel fulfilled every day. So being looked down upon for such unreasonable reasons was humiliating. John's words pierced my heart, and I would often cry quietly by myself. And lately, John has been saying he wants to be alone more often. In reality, I could live by myself, but I've been sticking with you out of necessity. Don't forget that. Why does he always look down on me? Perhaps it has to do with John's increased overtime at work. It's because you're not working hard enough that I have to work overtime to make ends meet. How about being a little grateful? I was often blamed like this. But even though he's working overtime, it doesn't seem like his salary is increasing. I can tell because I carefully check our finances. But the salary doesn't really change much, does it? Even though you talk big. Maybe that ticked him off, because John got angrier than I've ever seen him before. Who do you think is making this lifestyle possible? If I wanted to, I could dump you easily. Be prepared. He said something that sounded almost like a threat. He wasn't like this before we got married. Since that incident, our conversations as a couple have steadily decreased. Then, one day, something happened that pushed me further into despair. When we visited John's parents during Thanksgiving, his mother served tea and said, "You two have been married for 8 years now, right? Emily, you used to say you wanted a child soon. Considering your age, have you decided on how many children you want?" I thought this was the perfect time to discuss the issue, so I was about to open my mouth. But then, "Mom, we're not having kids. Emily and I talked it over and decided." "Oh, is that so?" "Yeah, she said she absolutely hates the idea of taking care of kids, whether it's at work or home." "What? Wait a minute, what are you saying?" "Mom, can you not bring it up so much? It's stressful for Emily, too." "No, that's not what Well, if that's what you two have decided, it's okay to just be the two of you. It's certainly hard work." With that, my mother-in-law left the room and I was left unable to discuss anything. On the car ride home, I asked, "Why would you tell such a lie? I love children and want them, but you keep saying you don't want them yet." The fact that we can't afford to have a child because you don't work full-time is true. Only start talking when you start earning as much as me. I thought preschool teachers earned more. What a disappointment. I don't like the way you're saying that. From the beginning, I never liked children and I never planned on having them. Children are just a financial burden. I'd rather spend that money on myself. While I was shocked, John just laughed. You should never mix personal matters with work. I knew that, of course, but I couldn't help but dwell on this issue. Children are sensitive to these things. A girl named Amy from the class I'm in charge of approached me. "Miss Emily, what's wrong? You seem less cheerful today." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to worry you. I'm fine," I said, patting her head. Amy wasn't the type to stand out, but she was very mature and kind for her age. She must be receiving a good upbringing. "You're not fine. You're usually much more cheerful. I don't want to see Miss Emily like this," she said sadly. I felt terrible for causing such a young child concern. "Maybe my daddy can help with Miss Emily's problem. He's a superhero and helps lots of people. He's picking me up tomorrow, so I'll tell him." Amy's mother usually picked her up, but she said her father was coming to the preschool tomorrow because her mother was busy. I told her I was fine, but Amy insisted on introducing me. I hadn't really spoken to Amy's father since I met him at the school entrance ceremony, so I was a bit nervous. The next day, as Amy said, her father came to pick her up. "Thank you for looking after Amy. I'm her father. I've heard a lot about you from my daughter. I really appreciate that she seems to be having a good time." "Oh, not at all. We're the ones who should be thanking you. Amy is a very kind girl." I got the impression that he was a very polite person, but I didn't really feel like sharing my personal affairs, especially because they were quite embarrassing. They were not something that could be easily spoken about. "I can tell that Miss Emily is worried about something, so I want you to talk to my dad." "Thank you, Amy. I really appreciate your concern, but I understand how you feel. It can be difficult to confide in someone, even if they're a close acquaintance. However, my daughter is really worried about you. If there's anything going on, please let me help." Surprised, I received a business card from Amy's father and saw his title. But looking back, I think that was the moment my fate changed. That was when I decided to take revenge on John. While I was preparing for that moment, John suddenly approached me. "Hey, how about we get a divorce?" It was after a long time that John came home early, and we had dinner together. My hands, which were washing dishes, stopped there. Perhaps he thought I was bewildered by the suddenness. John grinned unpleasantly. You might not like it, but my feelings won't change. May I ask why? A huge sum of money is coming in. Do you want to know how much? $3 million. $3 million! John's mouth did not stop, even though I hadn't asked anything. I've been with you because I wanted money. Compared to me, it was just a drop in the bucket, but better than nothing, right? But now, I have $3 million, so I don't need you anymore. So, let's split up quickly. You've probably had enough of being a leech. Where did all that money come from? There were a lot of things I wanted to say, but first, I asked John the question that came to mind. That's none of your business. We're strangers now. Okay, I understand. Let's separate then. Perhaps surprised by my swift reply, John looked a bit taken aback. By the way, I have no intention of living in this small house anymore. After all, I have $3 million. I'm thinking of using this money to live in a mansion. So, I've decided to sell this house too. That's fine. I'll start looking for an apartment then. You can pay off the rest of the mortgage on this house, right? Yeah, I'll pay it all off. That much, at least. I guess that's natural. Our positions are different, after all. Thanks, that would be great. With that, I decided to take action. John watched me move briskly with a curious look, and so began a series of busy days, packing and looking for an apartment. Once the divorce was more or less settled, I set up a time to talk to John again. I'll leave the mortgage payments to you, John. I don't want to argue about whether I said it or not in the future, so I've prepared a written agreement that includes all these points. Please sign it. Fine, as long as you don't start grumbling about it later. I always wondered why John always had to add an unnecessary remark. A surge of irritation welled up in me, but I managed to keep my temper. John, who had been perusing the divorce agreement, suddenly stopped in his tracks. Hey, what's this alimony section about? Why should I be the one to pay? If anything, Emily, who doesn't work full-time, should be the one paying. You thought you could hide it from me? You're so naive, I replied, calmly laying out some documents on the table. Upon seeing this, John's face turned increasingly pale. Thanks for all the overtime work you've been doing every day. I appreciate all your hard work. You love your job, don't you, John? It must be fun to be with your mistress. There was a photo of John and a woman arm in arm, looking quite friendly with each other. This woman, she's just a junior colleague. It just looks like we're arm in arm. Is this your attempt to catch me out? You're still going to say that, huh? Then how about this? I thrust another photo at him. It showed John and the same woman entering a hotel. I thought this would break him, but for some reason, he lashed out again. This must be a fabrication. Don't you know how advanced photo manipulation technology is these days? Do you really think you can fool me with this? I let out a heavy sigh. I hadn't expected him to be this stubborn, but I had anticipated this and made preparations. This isn't something I took. I think they'll be here soon. Just then, the doorbell rang. John looked flustered, unsure of what was about to happen. I went to the front door to greet them and led them back to the living room. This is my attorney. These evidences were requested from a private detective agency, so there's no way they could be fabricated. If you have any doubts, should I call them right now? Pleasure to meet you. I'm Kessler, Emily's attorney. From now on, we'll be discussing the divorce proceedings through me. Now, do you have any issues with the photographs? I'll be happy to answer all your questions. Seeing Kessler's confident smile, John started to panic. It turned out that John's claim of working overtime because he was busy was a lie. The private detective agency found out that he was actually leaving work on time. The reason his income hadn't changed was because of this. If he wasn't working overtime, there would be no increase. He was spending his nights with his mistress. When his affair was exposed, one thing finally made sense to me. It was when John started saying he wanted to be alone. He probably said that because he wanted to be with his mistress. The lawyer I hired this time was a highly skilled one. It was Amy who connected me with him. Amy's father happens to be the CEO of a well-known group. Her words about her father being a superhero weren't a lie after all. Upon hearing the situation, Amy's father immediately contacted a private detective agency and introduced me to a lawyer. I thought it was a bit over the top, but the more I looked into John, the more his flaws started to emerge. And that made me so angry that I decided to go all out. You're acting as if this is all you're doing. You want alimony? I can give you that. I have $3 million. I can easily pay you that. If you're done here, just leave. I never want to see your face again. I would have left even if you hadn't said that. If anything comes up in the future, let's talk through the lawyer. Don't come to me directly. Who would ever want to see you? He spat out these last words. I silently packed my things and left the house. Perhaps if it had been anyone but John, it might have had more impact, but he was himself to the end. Just how arrogant can one be? I wondered as I left the house. I thought my tale of revenge had come to an end. Then, a few months later, just as I was getting used to my new life in the apartment where the incident occurred, something big changed. My source of stress was gone. At first, of course, I was shocked by the fact that I had divorced, but I didn't even have a shred of love left for John. That's why I also felt a sense of relief. Despite that, he had the audacity to barge into my new apartment. Please, will you listen to me? I beg of you. He shouted so loudly at the entrance that I reluctantly let him in. What on earth do you want? I told you I don't want anything to do with you anymore. He was smirking as he looked around my apartment. I found it utterly disgusting. Well, you've got a nice place here for being separated from me. If there are 2 rooms in this spacious apartment, I can make one my room right away. What are you talking about? There's no way I'm going to live with a stranger. Don't be so cold. We were once a couple, remember? We've officially become strangers through the legal process. Now what is it you want? Don't talk like that, Emily. It's scary. Well, I just realized that I need Emily. I bet you'd have a better life with me, wouldn't you? You were living in a mansion with your mistress. I guess you were just with me out of necessity. I don't need to be with you. No, that was just a moment of confusion. I need Emily. You're just being stubborn, aren't you? Didn't you tell me you didn't need me anymore because you were getting $3 million? Why don't you find your next wife with that money? No, you're wrong. John started crying all of a sudden. The truth is, I said I was getting $3 million because I thought I had won the lottery, but when I looked closely, the numbers were wrong. I jumped the gun. What on earth is he talking about? I was so dumbfounded that I couldn't say a word. I've been looking for a reason to leave you. That's why I think I misread the numbers. I thought that if I got $3 million, I could divorce you right away and do whatever I wanted. When he saw the cold look in my eyes, he hurriedly added, but I want you to feel reassured. I ended my relationship with her. From now on, I'll only love Emily. So let's start over. You still love me, don't you? What are you saying? I don't know anything about that. You can do whatever you want. Please help me. I thought I was getting $3 million and I badmouthed my boss and quit my job. I can't ask him to take it back now. And what is worse, as soon as my love found out I didn't have any money, she stopped contacting me. It seemed like John was abandoned by his mistress. Of course, no one would want a man who was divorced, jobless, penniless, and homeless. That's why I can't pay my loan and I don't have a place to live. Emily, you're my only hope. I told you, I don't know anything about it. If you stay here any longer, I'll take appropriate measures. Did you forget about the pledge you signed when we divorced? If you break your promise, I'll claim 5 times the alimony. That's enough! You? John, in a fit of anger, raised his hand. Is that what you're going to do? If you lay a hand on me, I'll call the cops right away. You could be charged with assault. This apartment complex has security cameras, so even if you run, your face will be clearly captured. John turned pale at these words. Get out, now, or I'll report you for trespassing. At the mention of a report, John fled. There was a sound like someone tumbling down the stairs, but I simply shut the door without concern. Since then, John never came back. Later, my in-laws came to apologize to me. They seemed not to have anticipated such a situation. When I asked them about John's situation, they told me he had fractured his leg falling down the stairs that day. He had to be hospitalized for 2 months, which caused his expenses to pile up. However, he also had a mortgage and alimony to pay me, so he needed to find work as soon as possible. He begged his boss to let him work from home and rescind his resignation, but he had been quite rude when he quit, and they wouldn't let him come back. My in-laws fronted the alimony, so he also had that and the mortgage to repay. He's going to have a tough time. He really brought this on himself. Once things had settled down, I went to visit Amy's house. When I told Amy's father that everything had been resolved, he was very pleased. I've always wanted to meet you since Amy often talks about you. I didn't expect it to happen like this. I just made a few calls. I'm glad it worked out. I'm so happy to see Miss Emily smiling again. She could really be called a life changer. I'm overwhelmed with gratitude. My husband looked down on me, but because I was a preschool teacher, I am who I am now. I deeply felt the importance of cherishing every encounter. I love my job more than ever and want to keep doing my best.